are on the receiving end of tremendous hate and violence, and nobody talks about that. And as you mentioned, what we're witnessing in UCLA is absolutely horrifying. These protesters being attacked by, bear spray and fireworks, and some of them being beaten up, and you see like some serious injuries. But because the climate in this country is one in which one side gets demonized, that empowers and emboldens the response, not just from police, but also from vigilantes. And I just want to know one last thing, just because Stephen is here, and I think it's really relevant, is there's a person that I know named Simone Zimmerman, who...
She's in town today for an Intercept event.
That's right. And she are on the receiving end of tremendous hate and violence, and nobody talks about that. And as you mentioned, what we're witnessing in UCLA is absolutely horrifying. These protesters being attacked by, bear spray and fireworks, and some of them being beaten up, and you see like some serious injuries. But because the climate in this country is one in which one side gets demonized, that empowers and emboldens the response, not just from police, but also from vigilantes. And I just want to know one last thing, just because Stephen is here, and I think it's really relevant, is there's a person that I know named Simone Zimmerman, who...
She's in town today for an Intercept event.
That's right. And she's one of the most conscientious and decent human beings that you'll ever meet. And she knows personal people in her life who have lost loved ones on October 7th from the attack that Hamas carried out. And she was horrified by that attack. And she's equally horrified by Israel's response and the mass slaughter. And she's one of those people who is fighting for a better future for Palestinians and Israelis. And she was at Passover Seder at Columbia, joining the protesters and talking about how beautiful it is that she's in that setup. And Stephen quote-tweeted that tweet and said that he would like to donate thousands of gallons of kerosene, presumably so these people can set themselves on fire. And it's just such an ugly and distasteful thing to say. And I'm genuinely curious of what you're thinking when you tweet things like that.
If everybody celebrated Bushnell doing his protest, if more people want to protest that way, then God help them, I guess.
Yeah,
So-
but this is not about Bushnell, though.
But let's keep going in response to that, because Omar set up an interesting juxtaposition here between anti-Semitic mobs and peaceful protesters. So what we're seeing on these campuses anti-Semitic mobs, or is it peaceful protesters from your perspective, Stephen?
From my perspective, I mean, it really depends on which series of videos that you watch. I think from an American perspective, it really shouldn't matter if they're anti-Semitic mobs or if they're protesting foreign policy or whatever. The United States, we don't have hate speech laws. We should be allowed to say really whatever you want in protest, assuming you're not violating any social or whatever the ordinances are. I know, like, for some college campuses, you're not allowed to block pathways, or you can't protest if they've got events planned for graduations or whatever. And as long as you're not disrupting the peace in a way where you're like, you can't blow loudspeakers, I think, on college campuses. As long as you're following the laws, you'll be able to protest however you want.
But if you are, say, what we saw from NYPD and LAPD actually last night, if you're violating laws, university rules even, with an encampment, if you broke into the hall like they did and have been barricaded up in there, what did you make of the NYPD response just at Columbia, for example?
I like to wait till the dust settles on this because I hear so many different things about how students were all being peaceful. I've seen, obviously, the videos of like some of the stuff being broken into. I think that when it comes to an analysis of how to respond to these particular events, I think that the start and stop needs to be what are the rules and regulations in place, because a lot of people will jump in and start arguing, well, it's a public area, so they can be wherever they want or do wherever they want without even understanding the rules and regulations in place. I think as a blanket rule, I don't know why this particular situation would need any kind of unique analysis. It would be the same as all protests. If you're in a private college, my understanding is they can remove you whenever they want. It's private property. If you're in a state-funded or public university, then there are certain areas that are supposed to remain open to the public, and they can't remove you unless you are not there in an ordinary manner if you're disrupting some other event. I don't see anything about these particular set of protests that would call for any type of unique analysis that escapes like that fundamental rule to protests in the United States. Yeah.
And your fundamental rule then to quote tweet with the kerosene.
I thought it was insane that you had delusional people, especially young children in the United States, that don't know any part of this conflict whatsoever, which is probably the vast majority of the people protesting it, that people are celebrating people setting themselves on fire. That is just unbelievable to me. You saw a guy do it in front of, I think, one of the New York City courthouses for the Trump stuff. You saw the Aaron Bushnell guy do it for who knows what reason. I guess because he thought the whole world wasn't already paying attention to this issue. And yeah, the idea of people ever celebrating themselves in a democratic first world country, setting themselves on fire for an issue that already has an unlimited amount of international attention, is unbelievably stupid to me.
But how does it relate to this particular instance? I mean, this is a bunch of Jewish students celebrating with pro-Palestinian students over Passover and talking about a climate in which they're coming together. Like, why did you decide to drag the Bushnell thing into this? That's
one. I think it's funny when people disingenuously load phrases like, "Oh, all the Jewish people are protesting with these people. There are so many Jewish people." That's not true. The last Pew Research thing I saw, I think, for 2023, shows that like 90% of people who are Jewish support the existence of Israel. So the idea that there's this huge group of Israeli who are
all over the
Jewish
place.
people.
Yeah, this is not about the existence of Israel. There's no question about the fact that so many of these protest leaders are in fact Jewish. These groups, they're not imaginary. They're not a figment of your imagination. You can actually go see them and look at how large their gatherings are, how loud their voices have been. The people who are getting arrested in Congress, so many of them are progressive Jewish organizations that are leading this effort. This is not about some broader, what are the views of American Jews about the existence of Israel. We're just
What
now
are the protests about?
The protests are about ending the slaughter of the children of Gaza. That's what the protests are about. What do you mean, what does it look like?
What is the end condition of the it's not just ending the slaughter, it's also stopping the blockade, it's also reaching a just resolution to the Palestinian conflict, it's also probably the unlimited right of return of 6 million refugees, it's probably the dissolution of Israel as a Jewish majority state, it's probably the what all does that entail?
You're conflating a ton of different things. A lot of these protesters have varying views about this. Some of them support a two-state solution, some of them support a one-state solution, but what's bringing everybody together in this moment is a realization that what Israel is doing to Gaza is absolutely unconscionable. That you slaughter people at that scale, that Israel is clearly waging a war on the civilian population of Gaza. That's what these people are upset about, and they want it to come to an end.
And the specific thing that they're protesting, and maybe we could actually find something to agree on here, because I've seen you describe yourself as kind of a moderate who tries to balance the extremists on each side here. So the specific thing the protesters are arguing for at all of these different campuses is opening up the books of basically the hedge funds that run their universities and divesting from firms that are either linked to the war in Gaza or linked to Israel more generally. Brown University reached an agreement with its protesters that they would abandon their encampment in exchange for a vote in October to divest from that. That gets to the question of resistance and the right to resistance. And so for years, it has been the kind of policy of the right here, and a lot of the center here in the United States, to make it illegal to try to ban people from participating in boycotts or divestment efforts or lobbying for sanctions against Israel. At the same time, you say, well, armed resistance is clearly off the table. So if you rule out both, you only leave people with one option. So even if you don't support boycotting or divesting from Israel, do you support the right of people here in the United States to
I would have to check
express
the explicit for how states have banned some of the BDS participation as a fundamental right to boycott? I think in the United States you should always have the right to boycott everything except for our currency. I think you have the right to boycott whatever you want. I don't know why that should ever be made illegal, but I know that there are particular things.
There we go. Look at that
BDS stuff that I think states look at, but. Of course, you should always have the right. I wish that the people that would talk about conditioning support for Israel, though, would also talk about conditioning support for Palestine, because they are some of the highest recipients of aid in the world per capita. The United States contributes a lot of that aid. It's interesting to me that it seems like we're always talking about how we need to condition aid to Israel.
Congratulations, Congress just banned all funding of UNRWA, so...
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Well, so actually, because Stephen raised an interesting point, that what's the kind of end goal of the protesters after BDS in the service of what? What does that look like?
It's a one-state solution where Jews are the minority.
Well, so you said earlier that, it sort of depends on whatever video you're looking at, that this is an anti-Semitic mob or peaceful protesters. And I think that's actually true. There's videos showing all kinds of different things, which is part of the issue of piecing together these stories via social media. So if the one-state solution is kind of the ultimate goal of the people that are protesting for BDS, what is do you think they're fundamentally anti-Semitic? Do you think they're are they, from your perspective, just mistaken, misguided, or are they bigoted?
I don't care. Trying to sort out the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is almost impossible, and in practice the two look almost identical sometimes. So the obsession of trying to figure out what is the driving thing here between anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism, I think in some cases it's good to find differences. So some people are discriminatory against poor people, some people are discriminatory against certain races of people, and figuring out the difference here is really important. When it comes to anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism in regards to Israel, I think that the talking points of somebody who's an anti-Zionist are indistinguishable from the talking points of somebody who is anti-Semitic. So
there are a lot of Israelis who don't support the Netanyahu policy.
That's not anti-Zionism such that they want a one-state solution. Even Palestinians don't want a one-state solution.
Omar, do you want to respond?
Yeah, it's utterly grotesque to conflate those two things. Opposition to Zionism is opposition to the state of Israel, the way it came into being at the expense of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who were driven out of their homes. And there's a different vision that instead of having a Jewish state that privileges one particular group of people over another, that you have a vision for a state in which everybody is equal. Americans would be familiar with what that vision actually looks like. You remember the era of Jim Crow and what that meant, and people who are demanding a different kind of country in which everybody is equal. That's not the same as being anti-white. It's absurd to even put these remotely in the same category.
Can I ask?
Can I just if I can finish just on the point of BDS. BDS also, by the way, has been clear about the fact that they don't take any particular political solution. It does certainly happen that a lot of BDS activists do support a one-state solution, but that is not the position of BDS itself as a movement that is calling for boycotts and isolation. And just on the free speech angle, you have states all over the country that are passing laws that basically make it punishable to boycott not just Israel, but Israeli settlements that are built in the occupied territories. And those settlements are war crimes under international law. And so you have a situation in which this country, part of its founding, is that we celebrate boycotts of, as part of deep entrenched part of American culture, the boycott of British tea during the founding of the country, the Montgomery bus boycott during the civil rights movement. And now you're saying that boycotting the war crimes of a foreign country is somehow punishable, people being denied the ability to work with state governments or schools or medical facilities or anything that is affiliated with the state. Those are transparently unconstitutional laws. They have been challenged by organizations like the ACLU. They have been defeated in court in many cases, but unfortunately they keep popping up faster than the rate at which you can challenge them, and that's a serious crisis. Anybody who's serious about being committed to free speech and saying that Americans should be able to exercise the right to boycott, including when it comes to Israel or Israel's atrocities, that's an absolutely critical issue that we're not talking enough about, that you have the power of the state being used to silence people's right to free speech, and I think that's a really important angle.
I want to move to the conduct of the war by Israel pretty soon, but on the one-state versus two-state question, isn't it the case that the current Israeli government position is one state? There's a complete rejection across the board.
River to the sea.
Of a Palestinian state, river to the sea. So
yeah, I would say I think the Likud platform has essentially always said as much. Yeah.
So okay, so more agreement. Like you oppose that. You think that.
I oppose it. He's in favor of the one state where the Jews live as a minority in that state.
Yeah, no, just to be clear, the Netanyahu government and the Likud are in favor of a one state in which Jews are privileged over Palestinians, right, with Palestinians occupying multi-tiers. If you're a citizen of Israel, you have a certain amount of rights. If you're in the West Bank, you get this many rights. And if you're in Gaza, you're completely under siege and there's nothing that you can do.
Which is every country. You've described every country.
My vision of a one state...
usually have more rights than non-citizens.
Yeah, well, in those countries, you don't permanently occupy those people and prevent them from having any rights and deny them citizenship as well. And that's the fundamental problem, is that Israel's vision is Palestinians can never be free. They can't get their own state, and they can't live as equals within Israel, so your status is just to be permanently occupied and helpless without rights. And that's a vision that I think is absolutely nobody who has a conscience can actually support. And my vision of a one state would be one in which everybody actually has equal rights and everybody can live equally, precisely the way that we live in the United States.
Which is a really fun position to take in the West when we have no stake in the game. I think it's fun to scream that at protests. I think it's fun to go on Twitter and do that. I think at the end of the day, that type of rhetoric is ultimately destructive to Palestinians because everybody knows that that's never happening. It's a pipe dream. Less than 30% of Palestinians are in favor of a singular state where Jews and Arabs have the exact same rights. Literally, nobody wants that. People in Israel don't want that. It's literally, you're just virtue signaling and paying lip service to an idea that is grossly unpopular across the entirety of Israel and Palestine. Not only that, the idea that you would have a singular state created where 6 million Palestinian refugees are then brought back into the state, there's no shot that any Jewish person living there who has lived through the Second Intifada, who has lived through Hamas attacks, who has lived through Hezbollah attacks, who's lived through international support for Houthi attacks, is going to feel safe in such a state. And they know that there would be absolutely no international support for them if that state were created and Jews were to start getting slaughtered en masse.
Yes. Let's pass it to Omar with that for a response. And also, I'll sort of add to that, maybe to narrow it down a little bit. What is then, let's say, hypothetically, we take the best faith argument, not from Netanyahu,